Hello, everyone. All right. Just checking sound and delays here. Okay, so hello, everyone. This is Joe Saz on behalf of BLOCKTV interviewing Kevin Pham on Bitcoin Maximalism. Right now, we're still waiting on Kevin to jump in. I haven't received any indication that he's unable to make it. So let's just give it a few minutes or, let's give it a little bit of time here before we really jump into anything value. I'm just kind of monitoring my my inbox here to make sure that I don't hear any bad news. Oh, hey, how's it going, Kevin?
Pretty good.
All right, so you jumped in. We're live right now. So I guess let's do our formal introduction here. Joe Saz here. Pleasure to meet you on behalf of Block TV, and thank you for your time. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Cool. I see that bulletproof vest on. Is that what I think it is?
Yes, it is. It surprisingly provides me a certain amount of psychological security for whatever reason. And I think
It's
it
not
has
surprising.
something. I think it has something to do with to extend an olive branch to have the kind of self-sovereign, um, ultimate accountability mindset to where I take full accountability for my safety
Uh-huh.
and my survival. And it makes sense. If I am going to make arguments about how I should be sovereign, how I shouldn't have to pay the state to protect me and my property, then I think it logically follows that I should do whatever it takes to protect my safety and my life, my
Are you
life,
worried
my
about
liberty,
something
and
right
my
now?
property. Come
Like,
again?
are you like undergoing any live, issues, or is this just kind of like like a theme, so to say?
Well, it's also kind of social commentary with the backlash and
Hmm.
the kind of very aggressive response that I've gotten from my former, uh, BT from the BTC camp,
Of course.
the camp I used to fraternize with, and I think that's telling to how secure they feel in their investment and their investment thesis.
Well, one thing that you discuss in one thing we agree upon is like how tribal this space is, right? I mean, we both agree this is a very competitive space. And that's one thing that I want to jump into eventually. But before we get there, I'm pretty sure everyone that's going to be tuning into this has a general understanding of who you are and where you came from. But if you wouldn't mind, can you just give, without a life story, a quick background, starting with your moves in Wells Fargo?
Yeah, so my background is in banking, specifically consumer and commercial banking. And yeah, I worked at Wells Fargo, which was one of the most valuable banks in the country recently. And I saw how much fraud was going on, how much systemic fraud was going on at this basically this national global institution. And yeah, it really frightened me. And this was happening in the midst of the financial crisis, and they were kind of seen as the only the cleanest shirt in the global financial system. They were known as a safe bank. Whenever, in reality, they were engaging in fraud as well. Um, and yeah, that kind of left a very bad um, taste in my mouth. And I studied finance and economics at university.
Mhm.
I went into commercial banking in Silicon Valley, specializing in actually baking tech startups. And also with there, I got very frustrated with how basically the two systems didn't talk to each other. You know, the banking system is not built on open internet standards. And being a millennial, I kind of just had the cognitive dissonance working in the banking industry. And then Bitcoin comes along, and it kind of reconciles those two inconsistencies with me.
Now, hold on. You say Bitcoin comes along. You got into Bitcoin, if I'm correct, around 2013, right?
Correct.
So
Yeah.
like that. Okay.
Yeah. So then, I was searching for an answer to my questions, for just kind of a very logical, rules-based monetary system, as opposed to a political and arbitrary monetary system, and also a value protocol that was built on a native open internet standard, or open communication channel. And Bitcoin came along, and it kind of reconciled, the cognitive dissonance that I've kind of had my entire career. And yeah, long story short, went down the rabbit hole, and here I am, and I'm still learning every day.
Yeah. So as far as still learning every day, SV's been around for a few months now, and what I don't recall you jumping right in. Was there a specific jumping off point after, the November 15th fork that, what after that date brought you to BSV?
So if you go back into my tweets, I actually was following and commenting on the hash war back in November. And
Yeah, I think were you
yes,
bashing it, or were you supporting it, or were
I
you
was,
letting
I
two
was,
enemies fail?
I was again diving deep, going down a different rabbit hole, and trying to figure out what the hell is going on here. Because to me, anytime I see a bunch of people burning a bunch of money in order to fight for something, that means there's something here. It's hard. Why as opposed to just copying and pasting a couple lines of codes and launching a Bitcoin clone like Litecoin, or doing an ERC20 token. Those things aren't interesting. When I see people fighting and burning a lot of resources to make something happen, it attracts my attention. So I guess I need to go back a little to the initial kind of fork war, the B2X war. Remember that in 2017? Yeah. During that war, I was squarely in the side of core UASF, 1 MB blocks, and I held that position for a long time. But I had a lot of people reaching out to me and explaining to me the reason why holding both forks makes sense.
Now you're referring to both Bitcoin Core, or you're talking about both forks as in ABC and SV? Oh,
No,
you're talking about even before that.
the original, so
Okay,
the
okay.
BTC and BCH, and well, technically, you don't split your UTXOs, and you keep every fork of the from the original Bitcoin chain, everything that kind of has the Bitcoin Genesis or has the complete UTXO set, dating back to Genesis. And the logic behind that is that Bitcoin is an experiment. We still don't know for sure, which type of implementation or which type of feature set will be the winner. So then, if you hold all forks, no matter which one wins, you're guaranteed to win. Whereas if you pick a fork and that fork doesn't win, there is a real possibility that 10 years of blood, sweat, and tears is all for naught, and it goes to zero.
Well, is this
So
a new position of yours, or is this something that
no,
you've been,
I've had the hold all forks position since 2018, probably most of 2018.
Okay.
And I've come to and for the people that are constantly being turned off by this idea, they're going to say, oh, it's inflation, you're increasing the Bitcoin supply. But somebody that I follow closely, he's always a very early thought leader in the space, Daniel Craig. He said that the way you should see it is that the price of Bitcoin should be the sum of all forks, and with that, there's still 21 million units. It's just you have a fraction of a unit on each chain. But I'll provide like an original thought here. Is that I realized that your investments dictates how you think and what your mind will allow you to entertain. If there is a competing blockchain out there, the fact that you don't have an investment in that chain does not give you a economic incentive in order to be open to that. Your mind immediately shuts down to anything that you perceive to be a threat. So an important thing is by holding all forks, you have an economic incentive to be open to competing ideas because you have a financial incentive to explore that idea. So I'm having a thought about like how can we make this space a little bit more open and less tribal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's that you have to strike at the root. And in order for me to speak to you and for you to be open to my ideas regarding BSV or to another fork, you have to have a little bit of skin in the game to be open to that idea. So to your users, if majority of them are BTC hodlers or investors, I would say that let's say you have 10 BTC, maybe if you just mirror your balance and get 10 BSV, which is like what one BSV is like $60 around there, that's $600. It's not a huge investment. With that, it will give you an incentive to learn and open your mind, because if you don't have an incentive, your mind is going to be shut off to everything that I say.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, no one really knows everything blockchain, right? I mean, this is a new tech, and it's ignorant to think that we have every path forward mapped, right? So
Yes.
I'm going to agree with the sentiment that there needs to be more of an open mind, and through discussion, debate, through facts, we need to explore these concepts, right? And I do agree, this is a pretty aggressive and in many cases violent space, hence your freaking bulletproof vest. I'm assuming that's not tied to anything. You said specifically it's tied to the crypto space and your role in it. So yeah, this is a tribal space. There isn't, a conversation lasts as long as two people start talking trash to each other. I mean, and this is one thing I wanted to open up. You support SV, right? And I had a conversation with Craig Wright the other day, and it lasted 3 minutes with me quoting the white paper and him refusing that as an accepted definition of a node as defined in his white paper. And I believe Craig Wright to be a fraud, not the real Satoshi. But, I just, I find myself, for example, with pre-mined coins, I find myself having trouble digesting a decentralized the promise of a decentralized coin or token after having pre-mined whatever supply, right? And do you find any difficulty in moving into the SV camp after knowing that Craig Wright is your leader? Like, is that something you support? Do you believe he's the real Satoshi?
So first and foremost, I think we share the same goals in having a less tribal, more scientific, and more civil community and discourse. Well, I will disagree with is you can't. It's not just going to happen if the community isn't that the way. You have to ask why, and my proposal to solve that problem is that in order for people to have an open discussion, their economic incentives have to align for them to have an open discussion, which is that they have to have, if not their investment evenly distributed, have a little bit of their investment within the um, within the cryptocurrency that the person that they're talking to is advocating for.
So, so you're essentially saying that this conversation would be slightly different if I had some BSV.
Yes.
Even though I'm a Bitcoin maximalist, willing to have, a nice, in a way, roundtable discussion with you, very, nice debate forum here, friendly
Mm-hmm.
discussion. You believe that if I had some BSV, I would be more, accepting of your ideas and such.
You'd have less resistance. You'd have less
Well,
resistance because the reason why the place is tribal is because of incentives, right? If
well,
somebody it has the majority of their net worth in a cryptocurrency, and you say that mine is better than yours, mine can do everything that yours is doing, it's going to zero. You're basically saying that I'm the reason why you won't be able to feed your kid, and are you gonna just sit back and just like, oh sure, I'm just going to accept your premise? No, your primal survival instincts are going to kick in.
so maybe
Um,
there is an initial defense there, but I do believe that this is, like I said, a very neutral conversation. I'm not expected to be converted here, but I'm certainly willing to hear your side, and yeah, maybe you do have to, you know, go in depth a little deeper for other viewers, but for the
yeah.
sake of
So, and another thing that I have a criticism of people or the leaders or the influencers in this space or just in general in any space where there's a lot of high-minded, intelligent, capable people, is that their blind spot is that the majority of people aren't like that,
okay,
right? The majority of people aren't like that. So, you know, when I come to a conference and I have like a bulletproof vest, everybody's like, dude, you're being super like paranoid and crazy. Well, it's like, well, the majority of people in the world, or there's a lot of people in the world that have nothing to lose, and they are kind of crazy.
hmm
And you have to, those are like the long tail people that you need to look out for. And also, the majority of people are tribal. Majority of people are tribal, and they don't have a lot to lose, and they will attack you if you attack their ability to feed their family. So I'm trying to look at this from a large scale, knowing that the majority of people aren't like me. And
see, it's
basically there's an adverse selection problem in this open financial system, to where you have these kind of lower just low vibration people out there that really will just muck things up, because their incentives are aligned incorrectly.
okay. Uh,
And then the second point about Craig being um, the leader.
like yeah,
So
he's essentially the flag bearer, right?
one thing that I don't like about BTC, or just in general, is this whole notion of leaderlessness, or pure decentralization.
Uh-huh.
To me, that is a fantasy, and that doesn't map to reality. Um, to me, what I see is hierarchies exist. People survive. People compete. Animals compete. Everything in nature competes. And, I'm looking at trees. They compete to be the highest tree in
Uh-huh.
order to get the most sunlight. So, uh, the notion of like leaderlessness and having no hierarchies and a flat decentralized structure does not map to reality, and it's a utopian fantasy. Um, so I kind of I have reservations about the whole leaderlessness thing. And in regarding Craig, maybe blocking you or whatever. Sometimes there is a lot of people that are very knowledgeable, and they don't have time to explain things
You know,
to every
that's not a
single.
good, that's not to me a good argument. You know, if I'm Craig Wright and I'm trying to convince the world, hey guys, I'm Satoshi and I got it, I got it all figured out here, join me, right? I'm not going to be shooting, firing shots at everyone that asks a question, and our debate was very similar to this, it was I said, what's wrong with BTC, right? And he said everything. And so I said, well, can you be a little less vague? And so he said article section 5. I post section 5 and underlining the definition of nodes and how they honor the longest chain. And then he just shut down, right, and called me names and blocked me. Not a big deal to me, right? But as the face of N chain, the face of and he claims to be Satoshi Nakamoto as this really controversial and very powerful, arguably powerful figure in the space. That was really naive, immature, and I just it left a bad taste in my mouth, right? So, I mean, again, with him at the forefront, do you believe him? This is one thing that I find to be a really important question. Do you believe he's Satoshi Nakamoto?
I believe he was part of the team that was Satoshi Nakamoto.
Okay. Uh, yeah, and so you're supporting someone who you believe to be a part of the, genesis of the Bitcoin team, under the alias, or one of the people under the alias of Satoshi Nakamoto. And even with his antics and such, when you compare those as a developer, even let's say a brilliant one, I don't know the man personally. I haven't studied every bit of his work, and I don't know if he's a genius or if he's copy pasting or whatnot, right? But relative to other people in the space, I find him to be, that was pretty weird. That's pretty ridiculous. I've reached out to a number of other people and have been met with open arms in a way, to discuss things. Even Ripple, it's as debatable of a topic as that is, there's still room for people to grow, right? And in the form of a discussion, a debate, an educational debate with facts as its foundation, right? And I just feel like I didn't get that from the person who is almost single-handedly responsible for the SV chain, right? I mean, it's his brainchild in a way, or is that an overstatement?
So, does Elon Musk, you know, entertain flat earthers or anybody, any average Joe that, um,
Well,
you
to
know,
answer your question,
trying to
probably not.
ask him
But
questions?
again, this wasn't a flat earther equivalent. This was a white paper quote. You know what I'm saying? This was, me and Elon Musk debating the depth of the Atlantic Ocean, or I don't know. You know what I'm saying? We both seen a round ball of mostly water and Earth from space in pictures, and we both agree that the Earth is round. And
Sure. But what incentive does Elon Musk have to talk to every single person on Twitter that throws him a question?
um, probably very little incentive, almost none.
Yeah.
You know, so I would just say yes. I'm not begging to speak with Craig right here. I'm just saying as like I said, the flag bearer, and I don't know if I'm overstating his purpose in this space. Particularly with SB. But I felt like as a forerunner, I don't see Elon Musk rage quitting every conversation that has to do with engineering, or blocking everyone that says oh, your rocket's not going to work. I don't know what his interaction is like, but it was still an interesting uh thing to me, that someone that's so brilliant, or so they say, and powerful, was as aggressive and defensive as he is in his position. So that was something that I'm not going to overlook. And, obviously, if Craig Wright wants to talk, and we can have a white paper discussion, I'd be happy to do that. But I'm not trying to attack every chance I get here. Like I said, and like we agree, this space needs conversations. This space needs fact-based, objective, neutral debates, right? And that's essentially what we're doing. What I want to do here is I want to talk to you a little bit. We've established a little bit of a background, and then I want to enter this space where we can start having a give and take, where you present some ideas and we discuss them like we're doing, and then we both walk away with something, right?
Sure. And I guess my argument is, different people have different preferences and different incentives. So
Uh-huh.
maybe my incentives are more aligned to reach out to, you know, BTC supporters that are kind of still, partial to, me and willing to discuss with me, whereas somebody else who's actually building, who's very, short on time,
Hmm.
doesn't have that luxury of
Yeah.
speaking to other people. And I think kind of at a higher level, um, Bitcoin is all about verifying and not trusting, right? So um, verifying things for themselves. So I think it's kind of hypocritical to when people say, I don't trust Craig.
Hmm.
That's why I don't like BSV. Well, my counter argument to that was like, well, you're not supposed to trust him. You're supposed to verify that. Well, for me, I just verified that BSV works. Like I see people actually, building on it and using it. And for
So
me,
elaborate on that
that's
for me,
more
please.
compelling than, who Craig is, what he's all about. It's, the proof is on the pudding
Hmm.
that his implementation works. And I see a lot of real businesses building on top of it.
I agree it's not everything, it's not absolutely everything, Craig Wright, right? That's not the focus here. And you're talking about people building on his blockchain, right?
Yeah.
Is there, can you hit any specifics? You said companies building on top of it, as I understand it, its goal is to be both a currency and almost, like an Ethereum platform in a way, right? With currency being a cornerstone and the ability to write, you know, more information on top of just the application of currency.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
So
can you?
I think MoneyButton is a fascinating company. They've set it up to where you just sign in once, and then whatever website that you're on, um, it will map back to um, your account and your BSV balance, and slide um, you just slide across your screen, and it pays the service provider on whatever website that they're providing. And here's, I mean, BSV answers a question that I've been asking for a long time. Um, I think with every new kind of technological paradigm, the most important question to ask is what can we do with this technology that we could not do before?
Uh-huh.
Usually, in the early days, people always try to put something that already exists onto a new paradigm, like putting like the New York Times on a web page, where
Uh-huh.
that's not very like revolutionary. Whereas like Snapchat or Facebook or something, that's something that couldn't exist before without the internet, social. So I always had this question with Bitcoin, and I kept on trying to see people bolt on existing things on top of Bitcoin, and I'm like, well, that's not a very compelling use case because that use case is already mature and exists in different realms. So people will try to do just retail payment, or they'll try to turn it into like an investment like gold or ETF
Uh-huh.
or whatever. And I'm like, well, it doesn't seem that Bitcoin right is makes that existing product that much better. So why would people switch? And in order for people to switch, something has to be 100, 1,000 times cheaper, faster, better, right? And what I'm seeing in the Bitcoin blockchain is a use case that could not exist without Bitcoin, which is people embedding and hosting data and files onto the Bitcoin blockchain and then paying miners to include that data into the kind of the op return field in transactions and immutably publishing data and files that can be accessed publicly and is permanent. To
Okay.
me, that is a use case that I think Bitcoin uniquely can only provide. You cannot.
And when you say
You cannot
Bitcoin, are you talking about SV now? Like, or like when you say Bitcoin, is your default Bitcoin SV, or are you going to call SV SV or BTC BTC? Like, how are we establishing when you switch between the two?
so I see that product being offered on Bitcoin SV. When I talk about Bitcoin, I kind of talk about the idea of Bitcoin,
Okay.
the idea of
Now,
Bitcoin, not
I
necessarily the tech.
wanted I wanted to take it a step back for a second here. You're talking about these amazing innovations on the BSV chain, right? And a company you specifically pointed out that's innovating in the space, right? Now, what's your take on innovating in the space on in core, with something like the Lightning Network, right? Is that something that's fascinating to you? Is that something that's not very fascinating to you? What's your take on something like, that brings the adoption level, astronomically higher than it ever could be with on-chain fees, right? And on-chain activity. So like where do you land with something like that? The
So I don't think Lightning is one innovative, two executed very well.
Mhm.
It's basically a way to provide cheap payments, which is what Bitcoin originally and still can provide. So they're to me they're trying to reinvent the wheel. Reinvent the
with
wheel. I mean, if you download a Handcast wallet, you can have a non-custodial uh, wallet that can allow you to accept on-chain microtransactions.
so
Same
to
thing, same thing
you,
with
the
MoneyButton.
application of currency with in terms of Bitcoin is greater in value on SV chain than it is on BTC core chain. And that's despite Lightning Network allowing for Bitcoin Core to be both a store of value and a medium of exchange.
So Bitcoin was always provided those two things.
Well, it was let's say it definitely provided a store of value and it questionably at times provided a medium of exchange, right? Because if it costs $30 to order a $15 pizza at peak hours, whatever, peak mining fees, no one's going to use Bitcoin, right? So
Yeah,
that
it
definitely
became
secured it.
expensive because they limited the block size.
Of course. And with something like the Lightning Network, where an off-chain solution was able to create, or obviously it's in its infancy, right? And it's very promising. I don't know if you've experimented with it, but it's really cool stuff, and it does open the door to a medium of
So
exchange
to me, that's
on.
way too complicated. Why don't we just increase the block size?
Well, so I guess, that question's been addressed, and the answer has typically been that increasing the block size will lead to a path of centralization through a couple different mechanisms, right? And centralization is probably, in my opinion, as I'm like, let me explain to you why I'm in Bitcoin for a second. I'm in Bitcoin straight up for the revolt. I do not like the fact that central sovereign powers have, they're corruptible, right? Humans are corruptible. And if you give humans power, especially humans that have been in power for long periods of time, whatever we want to, bridge that with, hundreds of years or within certain countries or, decades in others, they get distanced from society and their standards become very different than the people that they aim to serve or that they promise or, whatever to serve. So we have an issue with centralization, and that's, I think, something you and I are both going to agree with. And in my opinion, I think
I don't
Bitcoin
agree.
Core.
I don't agree. We have a problem with that in Bitcoin.
I'm sorry, repeat that.
I don't think we have a problem with that in Bitcoin.
You don't believe that we have a problem with decentralization in Bitcoin.
No.
And you're talking
So
about SV?
so my thing is that if you want to have a say in Bitcoin's governance, you should start mining.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean that's the only way to
That's
have a
how
say.
that's
Or,
how
or
that's how Bitcoin's governance process is meant to be. The miners are supposed to decide which rule set they abide by. because they
Well,
have the most.
miners and free market, like in your case, right? You know, miners have a say. As a miner, you get to vote on an improvement proposal. You agree or you disagree, or you know whatever the path is, right?
Mhm.
And as a consumer, you have a choice. I want to invest my money in this chain or that chain, right? There's people that love XRP, Verge, Litecoin, you know, and you and I have even been on the same, you know, battlefront in certain instances where we were both trashing the same coins. And you know, that's just something I want to hit really fast. Does this move to SV mean you are now a multi-coiner, or are you still a Bitcoin maximalist, but you're a Bitcoin SV maximalist?
Means I'm a Bitcoin SV maximalist. As of right now, the
Hmm.
situation can change quickly. Um,
Are you
so,
expecting it to?
so the argument about the free market decides, I somewhat agree. I also agree that the market is ignorant and inefficient right now, and it's very short term in its mindset. So basically, the argument is that BTC has the highest price. If holders think it's not decentralized anymore, they don't have control, then they're going to dump BTC, and that's going to wreck all the miners, right? That rely on a high Bitcoin price to generate sufficient revenues. Um, my thing is BSV, and myself personally, I'm a long-term investor, and I'm looking down the road.
Uh-huh.
And basically, the block reward subsidy is an artificial subsidy to perform kind of a bootstrapping mechanism, and it's not meant to be the revenue source for miners in the long term. As you know, with the block reward subsidy happening at a regular kind of
Yeah,
interval.
I mean that of course
Um,
depends on the value of Bitcoin relative to the cost of mining at the point in time, right? So I mean right now,
yeah.
I'm
So
sure.
so one moment, let me finish. So then basically, you have a lot of short-term people just looking at optimizing for the block reward subsidy. The people who are looking at the long term are looking at for the Bitcoin that maximizes on-chain transaction revenue, which is going to supplant the block reward subsidy as the main revenue source for miners. So long-term oriented miners and investors are looking at that, and the majority of them, to me, are in BSV.
Well, you know, speaking of miners and SV, I mean, it's not like it has this humongous, you know, sample size of miners, right? It's pretty. I mean, I don't have specific numbers off the top of my head right now, but as I understand it, it's basically N-chain and Calvin Ayre, right? Mining SV. Is
No,
that
there's some Chinese pools in
so?
there as well. I
So
think there's a mempool.
do you by any chance know off the top of your head like the control that you know those two powers have on the total hash output?
I don't have it off the top of my head, but I think it's pretty evenly distributed between you know 3 or 4 or 5 mining pools.
Okay,
There's a
so
there's a lot of miners that aren't identifying themselves. Um, and again, it's early days. The
uh-huh.
majority of miners are very short-term oriented. The majority of investors are very short-term oriented. That's why Bitmain is going through a lot of trouble and havoc right now.
Yeah,
And there's a kind of a laundry list of defunct miners that don't really understand their long-term interest, and they go out of business. And what I see in BTC is very kind of short-term protectionism that we need to change the entire kind of the economic model of Bitcoin in order to protect against Bitmain. But what we saw in the BCH BSV hash war was you just allow the free market to work, and it'll take care of irrational players by itself. And
absolutely. Yeah.
Bitmain is going through a lot of trouble because they bet the farm on trying to pump and dump BCH, and now they're probably going to go out of business
Oh yeah, I mean it opens up a huge can of worms. All the people that were associated with Bitmain are now on fire, as well as Bitmain itself, and that opened the door to competition. It's going to be it's a really interesting void, and obviously they probably shouldn't have done what they did, right?
So
All their eggs.
that comes to kind of like a fundamental point about how Bitcoin works. Is are you going to allow the free market to work itself out, or are you going to enforce short-term protectionist measures in order to protect
So yeah,
against,
we're
you
talking
know,
about in a way like quantitative easing and stuff like that,
yeah.
like or
So then, might the whole block size debate and keeping it small was to allow the little guy to protect itself against the big evil billionaire Chinese miner, when we see in BCH or BSV, by not you know not kowtowing to short-term protectionist measures, and by just allowing free market competition to work, Bitmain obsoleted themselves.
uh-huh.
So I think that's a fundamental philosophical split within the two communities, is that BSV is very market oriented, and they're very um, they're a believer in allowing free markets to work and allowing competition and rational incentives to work, whereas in BTC they're very distrusting of the of free market competition, and would rather impose kind of artificial limits in order to protect itself by quote unquote irrational or bad actors.
Okay. So, I mean, I'm actually in support of the concept of consensus through great numbers, right? I believe, let's bring this like quickly to a different playground, right? Voting. Okay. Some people would say, all right, let's make it so everyone can easily vote, right? And some would say, well, not everyone has the right to vote because not everyone is informed. Well, that's kind of a slippery slope. To me, that's a very similar conversation as saying, well, the First Amendment guarantees free speech, but some people might use a derogatory term in public, and it inspires outrage across multiple different communities, whatever. But in order for that protection to be intact at its core, excuse me, I'm a little sick. In order for that protection to be strong, it needs to apply equally to everyone. I want some person to be able to say, I love you, and some person to be able to say, I hate you. And I shouldn't be the arbiter in saying who's right and who's wrong and what they're allowed to say. And that to me is like the little guy, right? If everyone has equal power, then that means a system is less susceptible to corruption, right? If you have a small central governing body, which we do have, and we've seen historically in numerous governments and corporations, it does and even in your personal experience within the banking sector, small clusters of people are corruptible. They do corruptible things, and then they propagate a behavior of corruption that is then fed upon by other actors in the space, and then it creates almost like a natural behavior pattern for those within that space. And then before you know it, it's the norm, right? And not only is it the norm, but then we're at a point where illegal activity is being done by some of the largest players in the world. That includes banks with no penalties, right? So I feel like the corrupting element of a single individual or small groups of people are the most dangerous threat to a decentralized system that involves the acting abilities of the small guy, right? Do you have any comments on that?
So we're talking about Bitcoin here, and the Bitcoin protocol spec says one CPU, one vote,
Uh-huh.
right? So
Well, we both
the more hash power you have, the more say you have.
we both know that Satoshi didn't I mean the argument is made that Satoshi, when that was spoken of, did not intend for mining pools, but now they exist, right? Pools and mining superpowers, they
No,
exist,
he
and
said
that's the
that
reality.
eventually mining would evolve into data centers.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that last?
said that mining will eventually evolve to large data centers.
Okay, so you're saying Satoshi did predict something along these lines that we have today.
Yes.
Okay, so with that being said, do you still believe that, the small guys, say I run one full node, right? I'm a miner and I can only afford X per month in, costs, hardware and electricity costs. So I just want to participate on the network to be able to have a say or something, right? I'll mine at a loss to participate in a democracy, which is very similar in a way to, we don't have to go down every rabbit hole here, but if you have enough people participating at a loss, um, I do believe that the loss is not truly a loss in the event that you have the ability to influence the future of a protocol, whether or not you're technologically sound or whatever you want to say. But I still think that in order for a truly decentralized system to be in effect, everyone needs to have equal power. And yeah, that's not a reality. Calvin is going to be able to put a lot more money in hash, right? Straight up. But if you take little guys out of the equation, then Calvin's going to have all the power, and so is Craig, right? They're buddies. They're on the same page for now, at least, and they have
Well,
been.
they have power because they work their ass off and they have a lot of money and they're smart.
Well, I don't know Calvin's background. I don't know how he became a billionaire. I mean,
Yeah,
we assume that.
he created Bodog, which is one of the kind of pioneering and the largest and most successful online gambling operation in the world. He
Okay,
became a billionaire.
so self-made is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's good to know. Yeah, so I mean, in a free market, I do believe that someone like Calvin should have every right to invest more money in mining, try to win block rewards, right?
Yeah.
And even have a say, right? But
And if he is not, smart in how he runs his operation, he goes out of business.
yeah, we totally agree, and he has incentives to back the right horse, right?
Yeah.
And to him that's Craig right now, and a number of other developers. I just I'm not going to call out every single name that's working on projects for
Yeah.
SV here, but
So I'm going to address, your point about, kind of equality and everybody having a say. And, this might be a little bit too kind of woke or kind of base for your audience. But to me, advocating for equality is basically the same thing as the Marxist or communist advocacy for a classless, non-hierarchical society, which is utopian.
well,
And
go ahead.
yeah, so then basically the argument that is being put forth is kind of Marxism or communism in disguise, to where that we should have no economic hierarchy and that everybody should have equal control over this means of currency production.
Well, I think we're bringing in this kind of communistic feel. I disagree with that. I think the sentiment in BTC is definitely free market. I mean, I don't see anyone talking about
So if it's free market, then you should have to compete to have a say, right? You shouldn't.
and you do with hash,
Everybody shouldn't
right?
just
You
be.
do. You do compete to have a say
Well,
if
no,
you have more money.
but then, yeah, the whole node argument is that it doesn't matter how much money you have. You should be able to, verify the blockchain if you have like $30 or whatever it takes to buy a Raspberry Pi or whatever. So it's a very kind of egalitarian communist
Well,
argument. So I'm getting at the first principles of these arguments,
uh-huh. See, I
and
would okay.
that's what I'm seeing. So basically, what I'm seeing happening is, if you I think the fundamental natural desire underpinning communism or democracy is people want to feel that they have autonomy and voice um, in the world.
Okay.
And with that, they will claim that things are, unfair when somebody else has more wealth or more power.
Well, see, that's the advantage of having multiple plugins, right? If people do believe something is unfair, let's say an implementation is, proposed is unfair, let's say, right? And you have a major backer.
Who decides? Wait? So then, who decides what's fair?
Well, at this point, it would be a combination of miners and the free market, right? If someone proposes a block size increase, right, and that sounds all right and good. Okay, we can add more transactions to each block. Transactions will be cheaper and faster, more efficient. Bitcoin will serve its intended purpose. Okay.
Okay, so I'm gonna stop you. So I'm gonna talk about like the fundamental principles behind these ideas because I've experienced these things personally. So I'm going to tell you what I think is happening, and this all comes down to the fallibility of human beings. Um, so in the beginning of Bitcoin, you had a lot of kind of CPU miners and GPU miners, and the barriers to entry was relatively low because the value was low and there wasn't much competition. And then what happened over time was the the mining ecosystem professionalized and ASICs were introduced because there is large profit margins and people are going to get more efficient in order to compete for the block reward. And then what happens is that the people that get outcompeted, they feel that they're being obsoleted and they're losing their autonomy and their relevance in Bitcoin. So then, instead of them accepting their incompetence or their obsolescence, their defense mechanism is to create a false narrative about ASIC miners being evil, when in reality they're just covering up for their own incompetence, and that incompetence forcing them to lose their say in Bitcoin. And basically what happened with that was the rise of ASIC proof um, mining algorithms or whatever in order to enfranchise those incompetent people that were unable to compete.
Well, are you talking
Um,
altcoins right now, like Monero?
no, I'm talking about people just in general. So
Okay.
then people that are getting outcompeted by more professionalized, more efficient firms,
Uh-huh.
they 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 create this narrative that the people that outcompeted them were somehow evil. And what's happening in the BTC is the same thing, to where these miners are getting very professional and very efficient, and
Hmm.
they're providing a useful service that the market is validating by selling a lot of miners or winning a lot of blocks, and people that aren't willing to compete and mine are villainizing these miners, but in reality they're just making excuses for their own sloth or their incompetence in order to ensure that they're still relevant in the space
So
and
is
they
this
don't.
something you're experiencing? Is this something that you can kind of call out, like that you've seen happen with certain individuals in
Yeah,
BTC,
no,
or is it a theory?
it happened with me. So basically, in the beginning, everybody felt that they were going to have a say, and then
Uh-huh.
professional miners came on the scene, and developers and influencers and investors in the space that are not providing a valuable service in the market felt that their power was waning and they were going to be obsoleted from Bitcoin. So they created this narrative in order to vilify the people that are providing a valuable service to the market. And that envy or that contempt for people who are successfully competing, that survival mechanism of, you know, the collective is the fundamental thing that underpins kind of populist, collectivist movements.
Now,
So,
let me
like,
ask you this. Was that a minority or was that a majority or was that, circulating narrative for a small amount of time? Because I don't get that feel.
that was the fundamental narrative underpinning the whole UASF thing, that, we, the collective, are being oppressed by the big, successful capitalist miner. And it was kind of a Bolshevik revolution to where, we need to villainize these successful miners in order for us, the poor downtrodden masses, in order for us to have autonomy. And just at a first principles level. So then decentralization is the advocacy for not having a hierarchy, right? And that means that we should all be economically equal.
We
Which
should
is,
all be operating on the same playing field. I don't believe we should all
yeah,
be
no.
economically
So
equal.
then basically, for example, in America, we have equality of opportunity. We don't have the equality of results or outcomes, right? So then if you're not competing, you have everybody has an equal opportunity to mine. But
Agreed.
not everybody has not everybody's going to be ensured equality of outcomes. And if you're not a successful miner, then you're going to lose your say in Bitcoin. And we can't guarantee that you have to say you have to compete for that right.
Well, there are still incentives, even as a little person, that is going to lose every block to mine, right? If you want to be able to vote on an implementation, or if you want to participate in a pool and get, fractions of a Bitcoin as a reward for participating in a pool. So I still believe that there is incentive for the small man to mine BTC. If, on the other hand, there is less incentive to mine something like SV because the block size is large and, there's the risk that goes along with the path to centralization as a result of large blocks, that does pull people away, right? It creates a despair phase in that mentality where you're like, well, there's no point in me mining because my voice won't be heard, and I can't really participate in essentially a democracy that's going to be the decentralized network for a global peer-to-peer economic structure that I signed up for.
So not everybody deserves a say in Bitcoin. If you can't compete, if you're not rational enough to maximize profits and provide a valuable service, or to pick an implementation that is in your interest that allows you to generate more revenue for you to grow, then you don't deserve a say in Bitcoin.
Well, it's not all about revenue, right? To me, a small, average Joe miner, I might just want to, have a token miner.
You're advocating a system based on sacrifice and altruism.
I'm advocating a system based on numbers matter.
That's not sustainable. If you're not rational, then you're not going to be able to generate the revenues in order for you to stay in business, or for
if it costs $10 a month, if I'm negative $10 a month to participate in this process, that's okay, right? If I'm negative, if I'm bankrupting myself,
so then take that to its logical conclusion. You're going to go bankrupt
if you're not making any money outside of that, right? Now, again, this is essentially a democratic process that, in the United States, we pay our.
Bitcoin is not a democracy. It's competitive governance. The people that are the most effective and the most competitive generate the most revenues, and they're the ones that are able to compete in the system. That's how the system works.
But you're focusing heavily on the revenue stream. I'm focusing more directly on if someone doesn't care about revenue, and like I said, it costs $700 to buy a mining unit, and it costs $10 a month, $25 a month in electricity, the equivalent of one, Uber ride or one seamless meal on the weekend. that would be a sacrifice some would be willing to make because they're willing to accept the fact that they're not mining for profit, I'm mining for a an ability to create global consensus. And the more people that are
Well,
acting on,
if Bitcoin is going to be built upon sacrifice and altruism, Bitcoin's going to die. That's not a sustainable. That's not a sustainable. Bitcoin is
well,
built.
that's what Satoshi did, was very sacrificial and altruistic in by stepping away from the project. Now it would be a whole different thing if the whole Satoshi wallet was emptied and or burned or put in the pockets of
Satoshi was self-interested. He generated a million Bitcoin.
Yeah, I agree. That's definitely an elephant in the room with Bitcoin, right? I mean, that's a very debatable topic. But there's really nothing like, we can go down a number of different theoretical roads, but either way, I think considering the circumstances of a brand new technology and trying to, spearhead a movement, I'm not surprised by the fact that there is an overwhelming supply by a very small group of people, right? Especially in its infancy, without any marketing or it was a very like organic growth process, right? So I'm not necessarily intimidated by 5% total supply essentially belonging to a single entity. That opens the
So
door to.
the fundamental thing that we're talking about was that you said that Satoshi was, altruistic when he was rationally pursuing his rational self-interest.
Well, until he stepped away.
He became a multi-billionaire for mining Bitcoin.
Well, years later, right? I mean,
Your argument was that people should sacrifice money in order to mine to have a say.
well,
And
people sacrifice money right now to mine the U.S. dollar, right? As part of our taxes, we have to pay money to the U.S. Treasury to print the U.S. dollar. We have to pay money to the, in a long chain of
no,
without
you're talking
exploring.
okay. You're talking about different things. You said that people should sacrifice money in order to mine to have a say in Bitcoin. And I countered, and you brought up Satoshi as an example, and I countered that miners that generate economic profit are the ones that are sustainable enough to survive and to have a say.
Okay. And where what do which part do you want me to address?
So you said that people that are going to sacrifice and lose money, that
Uh-huh.
Bitcoin governance can be built on people that are willing to sacrifice and lose money to have a say.
Well, because imagine this possibility, right? We, in the form of taxpayer dollars, you lose money because you have to pay to keep the U.S. Treasury printing bills, right? So there already is a paradigm where you, as a taxpaying citizen, lose money to pay for the architecture of creating or printing bills. And what I'm saying is that very different than sacrificing the $20 a month ballpark, right? For a single unit to be able to participate in the Bitcoin, proposal implementation process, and excluding all economic incentives, right? The
So,
only
so paying taxes is not paying a sacrifice.
Well, I'm talking
Paying,
specifically of your tax money that is allocated to funding the U.S. Treasury and its production, which is very expensive, production mechanism of create and printing bills, right? Ones, fives, tens, twenties, etc. That's a very inefficient and expensive process by design, right? You can't have a dollar bill that is easy to replicate. Otherwise, I'll pull up my printer and start printing, go to the grocery store, spend cash, right? It has to be an inefficient process, the same way that Bitcoin mining has to be an inefficient process. Now, fiat's far less inefficient because someone can press an enter button and introduce more money into the supply. So we're talking about something on the same level in terms of there is an economic incentive parallel to losing money to fund a system of, to maintain a
no. Bitcoin mining is supposed to be efficient. If you're not efficient, you go out of business.
but the process of mining Bitcoin is designed to be inefficient so that its scarcity is secured, right? If Bitcoin was easy to replicate, there would be a number of issues. It's secured through a proof of work consensus mechanism, right?
Yes.
And that is inefficient. It is a difficult mathematical calculation that you have to attempt to solve before everyone else does, and that costs money, right? Now, the
Well,
only people.
if you take the entire system into account, it is efficient because the blockchain needs to be secure in order for it to have value.
Mhm. Agreed. So I agree. The blockchain needs to be economically incentivized to continue producing, right? To continue producing blocks, there needs to be some sort of scarcity. There needs to be some sort of difficulty in order to produce it, and that's done through consensus, global, a proof of work model through consensus, right? And then on the other hand, you have people that are spending money to pay for the U.S. Treasury to print bills, and so the only point I'm trying to make here is there is, in a way, an incentive to mine at a loss. I'm not talking about for Bitmain to mine at a loss. They are a mining giant whose sole purpose was to generate revenue, and in mining their cryptocurrency and selling it, and selling top of the line mining units. Now, if I wanted to
So, so this
participate.
so this goes back to my point about different miners have differing time preferences, and some miners are short term oriented, and some
Uh-huh.
miners are long term oriented. So you can mine at a loss in the short term, but eventually that has to lead to profits in order for you to survive in the market. Just like Uber or a startup that burns money, while they're building out and they're growing with the expectation that they're going to grow their market share. And then once they do that, they can generate large profit margins.
So to you, it's not valuable as a sole individual to mine at a $20 per month loss, and to be able to participate in a global peer-to-peer infrastructure. That just doesn't connect with you. Like, to you, the only incentive to mine should be for profit. And keep in mind, I'm talking specifically about the little guy, average Joe, right? That has enough money for $600 to buy, or I don't know what Bitmain's selling their products for anymore, but let's just say a $600 ballpark plus the $20 a month expense. So I'm looking at, on an annual basis for startup costs, if I paid for a year up front, it would be $720, and $20 a month on after, excluding maintenance costs. And you're saying that $720 is not nearly incentive enough for enough people to participate. And as a small guy, right? As a
No,
small.
a miner that is generating, 100,000 times more profit than you is going to have way more hash power than you, and you're not even going to matter.
Agreed, 100% agreed, right? But if everyone is doing what I'm doing, then that creates competition against the superpowers. And that's part of the most important, part of this equation to me, is if the little guys can't band
Well,
together.
you're all going to be driven out of business. Just like if Bitmain could be driven out of business, then why wouldn't you be able to be driven out of business?
Oh, well, like I said, this is, I think you're not grasping the concept of, I'm not doing this for business. I'm doing this for, like I said, a very specific ability to partake in the improvement proposal process, right?
Yeah,
If for
but
example,
the thing is that you're not going to have enough hash power to have any type of say.
but if enough people like me do it, for example, if I'm just going to throw out a number, I'm not supporting anything in particular here. I'm just throwing out some real time numbers here. Bernie Sanders' campaign had 80% of his donation, and I'm not a Bernie Sanders supporter. These are just the numbers from the previous election cycle. 80% of his donations were below a value of $250. Whereas you had career politicians like or let's say insiders like Clinton that were getting, single actors were paying massive amounts of money. And I feel like there's some parallels here, right? If you have enough small fish, it's enough to counter a big fish. And look at what happened December 2017, right? When Bitcoin spiked to 20K. Coinbase alone went from 5.5 million accounts to 12.5 million accounts in the month of December. We also have an insane increase in value, right? Up to 20K. I truly believe it's the large accumulation of small individuals that is going to create the greatest movements versus the largest actors creating, a space that is competitive for them.
So you just confirmed to me that you support Bernie and his Jackmatic socialism,
No,
and
no. What I
I'm right,
confirmed to you was that I do
in
not
saying that
support him.
Bitcoin is BTC is turning socialist.
No. What I confirmed was that I do not support. I don't. I mean, we don't have to go into politics, but I
Bernie Sanders
specifically
supports
brought that
democracy.
figure out for numbers purposes only. Now, if you're saying, like, in a socialist perspective, not at all. What this is an incentive for everyone to participate in the network and for the majority to have just as much say as a massive small, group of people that have massive control over hash. I'm not talking about socialism here. I'm just talking about, if you have enough small people that agree and are on the same page through consensus, then there is a much greater pool of incentive to keep something likable by the masses, right? Like, if you have,
Do you think the masses have the capacity to do the data analysis and the modeling in order for them to rationally understand what is in the long term interest of Bitcoin?
I would say the masses do not.
Okay, so then why would you advocate the masses to be able to control the
Because
decision
there
making
still
process?
needs to be a check and balance. And I think the greatest check and balance against a central authority is going to be numbers. And in a Bitcoin ecosystem where people are voting on an improvement proposal, the advantage of having massive numbers is that if some nefarious actor is trying to do something bad with the chain, and he has, they have, massive control, well, there's an ability to fight back. And that's unique to Bitcoin, right? Like, if you know someone gets elected, and look at Maduro. You have Venezuelans walking in the streets, right? Like, raising flags and, starving bellies, and they're furious at this. But Maduro's been in power, right? This debate, or this issue, has been going on for quite some time, and the people really aren't affecting things much, right? There's
Well,
maybe one content.
maybe Maduro is in power because he told the masses what they wanted to hear.
Of course, and I agree with that completely.
You can have all these, you can have all these benefits and have the state administer all the wealth of the country to the people.
Well, you need to understand, I'm not socialist. The first lesson I learned in politics is poly being many and ticks are blood-sucking creatures. I'm not endorsing anything, because I believe that in a system of instantaneous communication for the past number of decades, a representative system is becoming more and more obsolete. We don't need that anymore. And that, again, applies to this, very similarly. This is a very direct parallel. We're saying, should everyone have the right, every small person, every small actor have the right to participate in every single democratic vote, whatever, from their cell phone, right? Some would say no, because not everyone is informed and not everyone has the right to say anything, right? But then you hear instances where 2,000-page bills are being introduced within a 24-hour period of time, with literally no time to read the entire document, and a bill being passed. That's a very inconsistent element of a democratic process. So, I argue that it's a double-edged sword, and the only way to really protect yourself from the backside is to, use the numbers, right? It's going to rely on a greater sample size of individuals in order to make.
So who made the decree that Bitcoin is democratic?
Well, I would say, I mean, let's debate that right now. I mean, if if I was running a mining node, and we're talking about implementation of a BIP, I would have a right to agree or disagree with that. Am I correct?
No, who declared that?
I'm trying, like, educate me on this for a second. If I run a mining node, the miners are the ones who vote on Bitcoin improvement proposals, correct?
Yes.
So if I'm mining, whether my hash output is tiny or my hash output is massive, I have a say in this process, right?
The mining nodes do. Just running a miner. So then basically the pool is the one that runs the node.
Well, yeah,
And
agreed.
then miners connect to that node, right? So it's
If
really the pools.
if
that are the
people are
ones
connecting to
that,
pools. You know,
yeah,
and again, in my reality, I'm talking about I want to be a sovereign node operator,
yeah,
and
yeah. So then you have to own your own node and your own mining operation.
of course, and it would be like I said, you know, a single unit for $600 and the $20 a month upkeep, and you know, I would be participating in a voting process, albeit with a small minority, but with enough small minority that is enough to counter the act of a single entity that might want to do something malicious, right? In the event of a state-sponsored attack, a 51% attack by, complete control by Russia, United States, and China combined or something, right? Well, if state-sponsored attacks are in the cards, then I believe, or even not corporate-sponsored attacks or whatever you want to call it, are in the cards, and I think one of the best counters to that is to give everyone as much power as you can, and that does include if you have one miner with 100,000 mining units in his facility or across multiple facilities, that's the equivalent of 100,000 people operating one node, and they can all
Yeah,
be
but
sovereign.
if they're all losing money, they're all gonna be obsoleted. They're all gonna go extinct.
Well,
The
again,
only way
that's
for you,
that's
the
if
only
they're
way for you,
economic.
the only
That's if
way
they
for you to
cannot afford
maintain.
$720 a month, a year, right? Or for startup costs. That's if they don't want to pay 720 bucks.
Yeah,
I
but
would be willing to pay
that's just
720 bucks.
over time as mining gets more competitive, your say is going to get lower and lower and lower to eventually where you have to turn off your machine, right? So what you're saying is not sustainable or realistic at all. In order for you to increase your say in the network, you have to generate more revenues and more profits to increase your hash power and your node's capacity in order for you to have a say.
See, I'm going to agree and disagree. I do believe that enough small fish can have a big say, right? You're right.
Yeah,
If I'm
so
losing
then
every block,
if a large group of fish are all losing money, their say will get increasingly smaller as we go on. So what you're saying is not tenable or not sustainable.
um, and again,
In
that's where
order for you to
it's
in order for you to
so
maintain the
seven
say or
hundred seven
increase the
hundred
say,
bucks a
you have
year
to
is not
generate.
sustainable to you. So $120 a year in electricity costs is not sustainable to you. If I was making 120 bucks, and I was able to fund an entire year's mining operation at a loss just for Joe to be able to feel like I'm participating in a
The
network that.
miner, the profitable miner is going to constantly grow their share and constantly shrink
Mhm.
your share.
And I'm talking again not about participating in a pool here. I'm talking about participating as a lone actor, a sovereign member of a global consensus, right? And
Yeah.
that to me is something that.
If you don't have enough hash, if you can't grow your hash power, your say is going to constantly shrink.
Of course, but the point here is if there's enough of me doing the same thing, if there's 100,000 people willing to lose $120 a year, then that is the equivalent of a single actor mining for a profit. If 100,000 people are cool with losing, right? We're like, someone's like 120 bucks a year, that's the equivalent of 5 seamless orders in Manhattan, probably less actually. I'm willing to skip out on 5 seamless orders so that I can mine at a loss and participate specifically in the governance part of implementing a
Well,
proposal.
how is a group of people that is constantly losing money going to outcompete people that are making money hand over fist and constantly
Well,
investing
because
in
the
their?
incentive is not to make money, right? The incentive of a mining giant, let's say like Bitmain, right, was to
No,
make
the
money.
incentive of a miner is to make a lot of money, or otherwise they
Yeah.
go out of business.
Like a business miner, they have to make money. They have to generate much more profit. Then they have to mine more Bitcoin and sell it at greater.
As a human being, you have to make money, otherwise you go bankrupt.
Yeah, but if I'm working a day job and I can lose $120 a year, that's fine, right? And maybe I'm an
How are you
outlier.
going to how are you going to invest in capacity to keep up with the network?
Well, let's bring this back real quick to the concept of paying. I'm already losing money in the form of paying some
Yeah.
of my tax
Okay. So
paid
okay,
off.
there's two groups. There's people that are
Uh,
making money, they're investing in increasing their capacity for the node, investing in lowering their energy costs, investing in economies of scale,
mhm.
or the people that's already small and they're losing money, right? So
Mhm.
Bitmain, one of the biggest mining operations in the space cannot sustain itself, then how is a small miner that's losing a lot of money going to be able to sustain itself?
Well, what's a lot of money to you?
You need capital in order to reinvest in your operation,
So if
right?
you make a minimum wage, right, and you're paying rent and you have $120 a year to spare, then you're okay, right? I'm not talking about being mining as a business.
The difficulty is going to constantly increase, and if you can't keep up with that, your say is going to be increasingly eroded, and your ability to generate a block reward will be increasingly eroded, and then you're going to have to turn off your machine.
No, well, that's I think we're not on the same page there, because yes, I agree with you. I'm not mining to get the block reward. I'm mining specifically for the ability, in the event of someone controlling hash and wanting to implement a proposal that somehow gets, some malicious proposal that includes, let's say, user identification.
If you don't have enough hash power, it doesn't matter.
Oh, if enough people do, and let's say the United States government puts up a massive mining operation that accumulates, 30% of the hash, and then, in sync with them, another actor does the same thing, and therefore there are two, cooperative attacks, then there would essentially be, in that event, the value of two small actors controlling massive majority of hash would be outnumbered by a massive population running small amounts. And that is the thing that you see, right? You see massive numbers are capable in big numbers of people, and in doing small amounts of things. Everyone giving $1 can, a million people giving $1 each is going to yield $1 million, whereas a single person can drop $1 million like that, right? So there are incentives for small individuals to participate in this network at a loss of $120 a year, solely to prevent in the likelihood of some sort of big entity attacking and trying to implement a new proposal. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah. So I think there's a very fundamental point that you're missing, is that Bitcoin is an incentive mechanism to where people that generate economic profit have the most say. Simple, very, very simple. Anybody that is irrational and loses money will not have a say for very long.
If you're Bitmain, yes. If your only business model and your only revenue is mining, absolutely. You're 100% correct. But if your incentive is aligned with a different approach, which again is solely to participate in voting, then your incentive is worth $120 a year. Like I said, this is a very small number relative to minimum wage, let's say, and this is something that if enough people were able to participate in it, it would be worthwhile to at least have a say. Now, on the other hand, is that the same reality? And we're talking specifically about centralization versus decentralization. The more mining superpowers that exist, the more likelihood there is going to be a type of centralized act within a cryptocurrency, right?
Yeah. So at a fundamental level, I'm gonna probably speak on this for like the last time. A group that is making money will always outcompete a group that's not making money. Simple, very simple. Second, the thing that prevents one entity from taking over is having an open, competitive free market system. And an open, competitive free market system, the game theory is set up to the fact to where it's always in the incentive of a third actor in oligopoly to defect, and that's what checks monopolies. That's very different from having a kind of a state protected monopoly, but in a free market system, monopolies are not incentivized. The game theory is to that there's always an incentive for the third actor in an oligopoly to defect.
All right, so like you said, let's I guess maybe we can move on from this. So just moving along, there's nothing that red flags to you in a small early SV operation where majority hash is probably within the hands of a small group. And one could say the same with Bitcoin, and that's countered with some other facts. But there's you're in this chain that's promoting massive blocks. It's promoting other applications on blockchain applications. You don't see a difference between promoting blockchain applications on a different chain versus Bitcoin being a sole having a sole purpose of creating a medium of exchange and a store of value. Like you don't, to you, Bitcoin being a medium of exchange and a store of value alone is not greater than SV allowing the ability to do other things on its blockchain.
So the direction and the roadmap of BTC is not optimizing for the medium exchanger store of value use case.
What makes you say that? Like what, the Lightning Network, I would say, is a direct counter to that. The Lightning Network allows for off-chain transactions, which are extremely low in fees, extremely fast and efficient, right? Now, if that's working, let's say 100% as expected, right? Let's say the Lightning Network is a success. It's slam dunk, right? What's to say that a competing chain has anything on top of that existing BTC with its new implementations?
So with large blocks, you can do everything that Lightning is doing, but on chain, which ensures that miners get paid to secure the chain. If Lightning is too successful, then that's going to starve miners from the transaction revenues that they need to pay for their energy costs, which is going to cause the chain to become unstable.
Well, keep in mind, miners voted on that and they agreed to that, right? I mean, there was an incentive for miners, and they believed it was greater. There was a greater incentive to accept the fact that miners are going to lose block reward, a part of the block reward fee in terms of transaction costs, and they're willing to sacrifice that in terms of, in order to create a more, global, adoptable, and microtransactable payment structure, right? That was an agreed upon decision, and
yeah, I'll agree with you that during the initial B2X fork war, the miners voted in favor of passing SegWit. I think one point that people are missing is that we empirically know that there is a lot of amateurish, incompetent miners out there that are constantly going out of business. And what I've come to realize is that the ignorance of miners that were mining on the BTC chain was exploited by entities that have a financial interest in Lightning and layer 2 solutions. So my prediction is that the most rational miners are mining BSV, and the BTC miners that don't wise up and switch are going to be put out of business, similar to how, similar and kind of follow direction that Bitmain is kind of going right now.
And, and again, there's no red flag to you that, like, look at the hash war that happened between ABC and SV, right? Roger basically had to illegally take hash from, other pools, right, in order to try to fund his operation. And is that a fact that we can both agree on?
Agreed.
And whereas on the other hand, Calvin and Craig, they were sovereign, right? They maybe called in support from across the community or something, and they might have incentivized people to switch. But it was, as my understanding of that whole move, it was very well orchestrated on their part, on Craig's part, and on Calvin's part, in creating a sovereign SV chain, that didn't have to really do anything nefarious to maintain its hash, right?
Yeah. So then I think the hash war was a very good example of Bitcoin's consensus mechanism. And what I saw was happening there. So, I wasn't paying a lot of attention to, BCH and the big block camp at the time. I know like Corey Fields, which was a BT sub, he found a bug in BCH, and honestly, I sold a little bit of BCH after that. I was like, oh, these guys seem kind of incompetent. And then the whole hash war thing kind of broke out, and I saw people turning on hash in order to kind of fight for their implementation. And I was like, oh wow, this is kind of cool. We're kind of retesting our Bitcoin Nakamoto consensus hypothesis. And what I saw happened was, as you said, Calvin and Craig were sovereign in that they had their own sources of hash power to fight for their SV implementation, where it seemed that Roger and Bitmain and the ABC camp didn't. So they had to take hash from their BTC pool
Yep.
and move it over to fight for the APC implementation, where I believe that they kind of went against the contractual agreement of the miners mining on the BTC pool, that
Yeah.
they did not give their consent in order to point hash at the ABC. And what I saw what happened was that they just rented a bunch of hash. People called it flash hash, and just
Uh-huh.
flashed a bunch of hash, real quick. And I think
Well, they did
they
it for like 3 weeks, didn't they? Or they were basically illegally stealing hash from
yeah
other pools for a little while, if I
yeah.
remember
So
correctly.
well, I think fundamentally it was short term non sustainable hash,
Uh-huh.
because eventually the hash would have to go back. And then from what I saw is I think they back channeled with a bunch of like ABC friendly exchanges in order to immediately declare a winner very quickly.
Oh yeah, yeah, of course. Of course.
And there was also threats from the SV camp that they were going to reorg their chain. So their lead dev Armory implemented rolling checkpoints or to decide consensus based on like kind of a rolling 10
Yeah.
block checkpoint, which is basically invalidating the whole idea of the longest chain is the valid chain. So what I saw there is basically what I've seen happening in all of these type of kind of proxy fights for control over the chain, is that whenever a faction does not have enough hash power to fight for their implementation, they subvert the consensus mechanism and try to implement some kind of backdoor thing to violate consensus in order
Yeah.
for them to hold on to power. Um, the way
I
that the way that I kind of see it is, I think that the nation state analogy to blockchains is the most accurate. And basically, what I see happening is it's similar to kind of a communist revolution or a dictatorial revolution, to where a populist or collectivist leader claims that the country is under attack. Therefore, they need to violate the constitution or the agreed upon consensus making process,
uh-huh.
and power needs to be ceded to this dictator or this leader to subvert the agreed upon consensus process in order for them to maintain power.
Right now we're trashing ABC and what they did, right? I mean, I agree with you. There's
Yeah. So the interesting thing was that they adopted the same BTC argument that you need decentralization and we need nodes to be able to
uh
verify, when in reality they contradicted their initial argument during the first fork war. So it was that contradiction that turned me off to the ABC camp, and I was like, you guys are using the same small block argument
uh-huh.
that you guys vilified in the initial fork war, and actually the SV camp is the one that's being, consistent. And it goes back to kind of my awakening and I think it's a very original hypothesis that all these collectivist appeals of equality and fairness is basically a survival mechanism for people that are being outcompeted in a free meritocratic market. The thing is that you've heard the term that kind of crony capitalist corporations, they say they like free market capitalism, but they really don't, right? Because real free market competition threatens their relevancy.
I mean, there's even legislation in certain industries against competition.
So what I'm seeing happening in Bitcoin and crypto at large is that there's these kind of self-professed libertarians or free markets, free market supporters. But the minute that they start becoming outcompeted and the free market starts turning against their power and their relevancy, they immediately turn away from a principled free market competition view, and then they start vilifying the competitors that are outcompeting them. It's basically a survival mechanism in order to ensure that you remain relevant, but you kind of subvert the health of the entire system. And I think there's a lot of people that are not conscious to what they're doing. So, for example, me shitting on Coinbase or Bitmain or whatever during the hash war is basically me trying to cover up for my inadequacies of not starting a billion-dollar company and to assert my agency upon Bitcoin, even though I don't deserve it because I didn't do anything. I didn't provide any economic benefit to generate the capital I need to have a say. And I think that this is a blind spot for a lot of people. Like, everybody says they love competition and excellence or whatever, but from what I've noticed is that people hate winners. People hate the Yankees. People hate the Patriots.
Well, I think you're talking about half the people probably hate them and the other half don't, right? I mean, there isn't like a unanimous hate for a winner.
I think the minority, the Yankees fans or the Patriots fans or the Laker fans or the Tom
Brady look at Trump. Look at Trump, there might have been people protesting in the streets, but you have people wearing MAGA hats left and right. You have,
But the thing is that the people that usually are supporting the people that are winning in the free competitive market are usually the minority, whereas the majority of the people that are not winning, they hate the winners, right?
So how does this tie into you to SV?
So what I'm saying is that what's happening in Bitcoin is that there is a large majority that hates the winners, which is the miners that are effective and powerful and relevant.
I'll agree. Overall, this is again a tribal space, and the camps are very aggressive toward one another.
So my contention that Bitcoin is turning communist or Marxist is that there is a large majority of people that are being outcompeted, and they're vilifying the people that are competing effectively, and accusing them of being, evil or enabling, centralization. When in reality, they're just trying to protect their relevancy and to cover up for their incompetence and their inability to compete in the free market.
Agreed, and that's definitely probably a case for.
And also, there's companies that are playing off of this frustration by propagating this, full node, everybody should have a say narrative, and feeding in to that kind of populist collectivist fervor in order to advocate for their position of small blocks, layer 2, selling, node, full nodes, selling Raspberry Pis.
Now
And
that's what's
what
turned, like what you've said so far, up to this point. That's mostly what has turned you off from BTC.
yes, yes.
Okay. And then and what has turned you on to SV is a chain that has currency applications as well as other blockchain applications that are yet to be discovered or that are in the process or, developing. You're it's almost like, there's this part of me that feels like you almost got bored. You know what I'm saying? Like BTC was, it's this slow, steady wins the race type of approach. It's this, off-chain solution is going to be the mechanism that paves the road to mass adoption, microtransacting, et cetera. And it's like I'm kind of getting this vibe that you like SV because of the black hole of curiosity that it creates for you, right? And versus BTC, which
No,
has a very
no,
predictable.
no. It's. I think a lot of people say that like I'm just addicted to being contrarian or
No, no,
whatever.
no.
But
That's not what
in
I'm trying to
reality,
say.
in reality, it's I'm very allergic to hypocrisy and contradiction,
Uh-huh. Well,
and
that
I'm
exists in
very
SV though.
attracted to people that are principled and consistent. And basically, what I'm saying is that the kind of leaders in BTC, they kind of subverted the consensus mechanism in order to maintain their relevance. In BCH, they subverted the agreed upon consensus mechanism in order to maintain their relevance. And then BSV is the only one that is, consistent to the agreed upon consensus mechanism. And it's because that they are competent and have the capital in order to stick with the competitive, you know, um, consensus mechanism. And that is the main reason. And going back to the whole countries or blockchains narrative, um, I have a question. Like, if you're as an entrepreneur, as an aspiring business owner, would you rather, set up shop and build your business in a country that is predictable, that respects the rule of law, or would you rather set your business up in kind of a dictatorial or a kind of a socialist country that will just, at the drop of a hat, violate the rule of law and
Yeah.
private property?
Of those two options, the obvious choice is the first. I obviously am 100% for free market. I'm the rip the band-aid off type, right?
Yeah,
I don't believe in manipulating things to make them look good. I don't believe in quantitative easing. I believe rip the band-aid off, right?
yeah.
Um, so
So so so basically, what I'm seeing is that these other non-BSV blockchains are very dictatorial, where they suspend the agreed upon consensus mechanism in order to hold on to their power over to that blockchain, whereas BSV is very principled in sticking to the agreed upon consensus mechanism, and with that, that is going to allow for predictability and confidence in people building their applications and building their businesses
so
on
this
top of
consistency you're
the
talking
BSV
about,
chain.
what inconsistency other than miners, small time miners getting, rage quitting or whatever, or getting, upset over competition, other than that, which, I personally am not in tuned with. I don't see that happening. I'm not connected to that the same way you might be. So that's not really something that I can particularly comment on, and which makes me assume it's a small minority. So the consistency that you're talking about in terms of that space, or an inconsistency in that sense, is such a minority, right? And it's almost, I'm curious as to why such a small thing has caused you to make such a big move, right? When you have inconsistencies in the SV protocol as well, like, you have all these inconsistencies with the man who alleges to be Nakamoto while also trying to, you know, patent troll left and right. You know, he's doing all kinds of very hypocritical things in my book that are not consistent with a, Satoshi's vision in human being, right?
Well,
So
I just look at the implementation of the protocol, and to me that is the most consistent to what Bitcoin originally was and is
So we're talking about
supposed
an
to be.
electronic peer-to-peer cash.
Or the
And
consensus mechanism.
okay, so as far as consent, can you just briefly hit that real quick?
One
What do
CPU,
you what do you mean by
one CPU, one vote.
okay, so to you, one CPU, one vote is more consistent in SV camp than it is in BTC camp.
Yeah, and you somewhat agreed with me, right? That during the hash war, they had, there was the threat that they had more hash power and were going to take over control of the BCH chain,
Uh-huh.
and they were consistent in that because they did have the resources in order to
Well, they were consistent
effectively.
in one superpower or a couple superpowers.
Yeah, so
Not one.
so then they were consistent to the original Bitcoin consensus mechanism.
Even with it wasn't one CPU, one vote. It was one Calvin Ayre and one Craig Wright, one massive say, right? This wasn't, a
Yeah,
number of
so I
people.
mean, like who controls it? It it doesn't matter. Like we're talking about the fundamentals of the protocol here. Like
Okay.
um, yeah, we're talking about the fundamentals of the protocol here, and if you have more hash power, you have more say. You
Uh-huh.
cannot like you cannot like those people, but
And
you
that's
know,
the principle you're referring to in particular. That is the principle to you that turned you off of Bitcoin. That to you in a free market, a big miner should be able to enter the space and profit, right? And
it's
compete and
yeah,
even compete to the point where smaller miners that are not, remaining relevant, they're not upgrading their, hardware, software, they're not doing everything they possibly can to stay on top of the market, they deserve to fall, right? And that's a free
yes,
market thinking, right? And we
yes,
both agree with that.
yes.
Now, and you're saying that's a principle that you have seen inconsistent in my opinion, a very small minority, a minority that I personally am not even exposed to. So maybe I can't comment, with that much weight. But again, it's still something that I don't see very much of. I mean, I don't see people on Twitter saying, "I can't believe, Joe Saz over here spent, took out a business loan and moved to Iceland and built a mining facility to mine BTC." This guy's a big, threat to BTC. I don't really see that happening. I do see regularly New York State making some exceptions to the rule to try to encourage miners to move there. I see stuff happening all around the world to incentivize miners. But what I don't see is any opposition to that. I don't see the opposition you're referring to. Is this again? I'm asking you, and I'm going to take your word for it. Is this a minority scenario where you got turned off, and maybe even on a personal level got turned off because of a small minority issue,
No,
or
no,
are you?
no, no. To me, in BTC, that's the majority view that it's anti-miner, you know, and it's fundamentally anti-miner or anti-big business. And to me, that's a very inconsistent and kind of political view.
See, the only thing that I would say I definitely notice in Bitcoin, consistent with half of what you say, is they're not in, bashing other miners for entering a competitive space. If anything, they're bashing, scam coins for entering a space that exploit the naive curiosity of people trying to, a make money and b participate if they stick around for the tech or whatever, participate in a financial revolution, right? And speaking of that, is that something that you believe to be consistent, a financial revolution? Is that consistent with something in the SV camp where Craig Wright himself has said he is aiming for regulatory approval? He wants a regulatory friendly coin. Now, is that something that, leaves a bad taste in your mouth? Is that an elephant in the room for the SV camp? For to you?
So I I've grown up and I've accepted how the real world operates. And working within the established laws is a rational approach to growing in a sustainable fashion. Um, and the reason why I'm not scared of nation states is that I see the real game that's being played at a big picture, and
Okay.
that I know that nation states compete economically,
Uh-huh.
they compete technologically, and that is what fundamentally underpins the strength of their economy, their military, and their nation. Any nation state that tries to push off a paradigm shifting technology, let's say the internet,
Uh-huh.
is committing suicide. Right?
Hold on.
So
Let me repeat that. Any nation state that tries to push a innovative tech is suicide, you said?
push off or to stifle a
Oh, okay.
paradigm
Of
shifting
course. Like
technology.
Blockbuster, fighting the
Or so North Korea, censoring or limiting access to the internet.
yeah, of course. That's definitely stifling, innovation and growth within, even, you know, I totally agree. I believe everyone should have access to, global
And
instantaneous communication.
at a fundamental level, you know, the nation states that have the best technologies become the most economically powerful, which allows them to have the resources to sustain their military in order to keep their nation sovereign, right? So I think a lot of people are putting the horse or the cart in front of the horse here and saying that this nation state is all powerful. But my empirical observation is that
Hmm.
the strength of a nation's economy, the productivity and the creativity of its people is what generates the resources and the wealth in order to pay the military in order to secure the nation.
So, you know, making a quick comparison, are you basically, in a way talking about the nation state of SV, like it being a nation state in the blockchain community, having the sovereign ability to, protect its own ledger, the sovereign ability to mine its own, uh, you know, coin. And is that in a way what you're referring to when you speak of a nation state power? Is
Yeah,
this a
yeah,
parallel that you're drawing?
yeah. And that goes back to the analogy that these blockchains are very similar to national economies, and
Uh-huh.
their governance or their decision making process determines their kind of economic productivity. So I think I did a tweet to where I said that the most economically productive nation state generates the most tax revenues in order to fund a military to secure their nation, to keep it
Hmm.
sovereign. And the parallel to that is the Bitcoin implementation or the blockchain that maximizes on-chain um, GDP, creates the most transaction fees in order to pay the miner to secure the blockchain. So I think the correct analogy, I think you were trying to hint at it, is that transaction fees are the taxes the citizens pay in order to pay the miners to
Then what is the
secure the
block reward
blockchain.
in this nation state?
Yeah, so then the block reward is inflation, right? So the block reward is trying to create wealth through inflation. And in Bitcoin, it's supposed to be a temporary bootstrapping mechanism.
Hmm.
Any any blockchain that relies on the block reward to pay miners is basically paying miners through inflation, which, as we know, you know, um, disincentivizes valuable economic productivity. And the blockchain that maximizes goods and services being sold in that blockchain's currency generates the sufficient transaction revenue in order to pay the miners to secure the chain. And I think blockchains are fascinating in that we are experimenting with different governance models we're having like these little micro experiments
Uh-huh.
and see how it affects that blockchain's economy. So you might disagree, but I will say that BTC's current kind of you know political uh, affiliation is kind of collectivism. I would say BCH is somewhat dictatorial to where
BCH ABC. I mean,
yeah,
just to
they're kind of
clarify.
similar to like a dictatorial third world
Yeah.
nation or
Yeah,
whatever.
it's a Roger Ver is a definite,
Yeah, yeah,
screaming
he's
dictator.
kind of
Jihan Wu is a screaming dictator. We
yeah,
both agree.
he's kind of a dictator to where I see BSV as being a kind of a conservative constitutionalist society that promotes um, property rights and free market competition and meritocracy in governance and decision making. And I believe that the incentive of miners to maximize on transaction revenue is going to incentivize them to make decisions that will attract the most amount of application developers and businesses to build and transact on top of its blockchain because they are incentivized to ensure their survival. And on-chain transaction revenue is what ensures their survival.
So that is a huge thing to you, transaction fees, and as well as innovation in the space. And you want to see innovation in the space. You want, and to you, blockchain fees being eliminated by something like the Lightning Network is on a long-term scale. To you, it means ultimate destruction. Is that what I'm hearing?
Ultimate destruction of the Bitcoin protocol as originally designed,
Mm-hmm.
and it may create a new governance system to where Lightning nodes are effectively now the most powerful entities within the space. So yes, it would just if it's successful, which I highly doubt. Yeah, it
You're
will.
talking about the success of the Lightning Network, which you highly doubt.
Yes, but
Uh-huh.
even
Okay.
but even if it was successful, then it would basically sap the mining the ability of miners to secure the chain and would change Bitcoin fundamentally.
Yeah, and absolutely, yeah, it changes it fundamentally in the sense that on-chain fees are no longer a part of the profit model to a degree. I mean, I would say you're not really going to be seeing much on-chain volume, right? If the Lightning Network is working as expected, I would think that the on-chain activity would be relatively low, right? So I think we agree, but we disagree in the event that it is successful. To me, the Lightning Network is something that's going to, and again, this was voted on by the miners. They were willing to lose the money. So the Lightning Network to me is this huge move in the form of adoption while keeping the playing field slightly leveled, allowing a small person the ability to connect as a miner to the network in order to have a voice. But overall, uh, in terms of SV, big block size doesn't scare you. They're promising bigger block size. Does that scare you?
No, because I strongly believe, and it's basically an empirical observation that free markets leads to innovation and costs of goods decreasing.
So what if you're wrong? You ever like in the theoretical space,
So
let's say
I'm
to
wrong,
speak.
then if I'm wrong, then capitalism doesn't work. Capitalism is wrong. Free markets are wrong.
Well, free markets have decided they wanted to participate in a different network is all. I mean, it doesn't indicate that.
No. The fundamental thing of free market competition lowering the costs of services and goods.
Yeah, I envision the reality is it was a move that was decided upon and agreed upon. as a result of increasing adoption and making micropayments a reality. I mean, that's now, can everyone in the world buy Starbucks
No, so
coffee?
we're talking at a deeper level here. Do you agree
Uh-huh.
that free market competition reduces the cost of storage and computation?
Free market, in theory, reduces cost by creating competition, of course.
You know, so do you believe that free market competition reduces the costs of computing and storage?
Of reduces the cost of computing and storage.
Yes.
Um, I don't have a straight answer on that. Does free market competition reduce the cost of computing and storage? Um, I would say, I guess that depends. I mean, what I'm hearing is, well, the question it raises in my head is we're talking about storage, right? We're talking about a gigantic blocks that are going to yield a
All right. So
gigantic blockchain.
so just at a fundamental thing, are computers, laptops, phones getting more powerful and cheaper over time because of free market
Yes,
competition? Okay.
there you go.
Nodes are fundamentally the same thing,
Uh-huh. Yeah, tech is
right?
getting better.
Yes. So yeah, I don't see the disconnect here. Everything is subjected to free market competition, and if you agree
Uh-huh.
that phones are getting more powerful and they're able to store more data,
Okay.
or that the amount of the amount of resistors that you can fit on a chip is constantly increasing, then
Hmm.
why would you not think that the ability of a node to store more data would not be subjected to the same competitive forces?
I would say that is speculative for sure. And if one was to make an educated guess, it wouldn't be a bad guess. Scaling is, an interesting conversation. I do think that, there might be a way to, have a terabyte block and, maybe some tech that minimizes it, zip files it basically or something like that, and allows for big blocks to keep being produced while at the same time having the ability for a newcomer to sync a new node to the chain, right? Like
Yeah,
that's
I
one of
mean,
Ethereum's criticisms.
I think as a business, you're incentivized to lower your storage costs, right? So
Uh-huh.
my thing would be the competitive pressures of trying to generate a profit will will you know incentivize people to innovate and decrease the costs of storage.
So,
Now,
what I'm
it doesn't
hearing out
seem
of
like
you
a
is
very it
you're a
seems like a
chaotic
very
neutral,
it seems like a very it seems like a very normal free market view that markets decrease the costs of goods and services. And to me, it's just very mind-boggling how that very fundamental libertarian free market perspective no longer makes sense anymore in BTC.
Yeah, I don't really. Can you do me a favor? Just take that one step further. Let me get on your level.
No, so then basically what I'm saying is that free markets and the profit incentive incentivizes the cost of storage to go down,
Uh-huh.
right?
And so you're saying small
So
blocks
that
on a
is
long-term scale aren't going to matter that much.
no,
That I'm
because
correct
because
in saying.
because yeah, because free markets work.
Okay, so you're saying on a long enough timeline, and that's kind of been a theme over the course of this interview. You're saying that on a long enough timeline, it's ignorant to think that small blocks are a long-term solution to to the reality where competing technologies are ultimately going to produce the ability, not yet able to be done, to somehow synchronize to a blockchain that uses signatures or whatever instead of every single transaction, right? Is that kind of like a general concept?
Yeah, that's generally what I'm saying. And also, I think another type of just fundamental truth is that economies of scale is a fact of life, right? The ability to generates a lot of revenue by having a lot of volume at very low fees or low prices
Uh-huh.
is empirically what makes a business large and successful, right?
Uh-huh.
You look at, Amazon versus, like Louis Vuitton or Toyota versus Lamborghini, right? Like which company would you rather own?
Probably Amazon.
Yeah, right. So Bitcoin mining is not, there is not immune to the facts of economies of scale. And as Jeff Bezos says, your margin is my opportunity. So my contention is that there will be a few large players in the space, and it's always going to be like that.
Uh-huh.
The thing
And we're
that,
referring to large player miners.
yes, and the thing that and also, large player um, businesses, exchanges, merchants, and whatnot. I think the reason why people shouldn't fear it is that Bitcoin will always be, or it should always be, an open competitive system to where somebody that can compete better can always enter the market and compete.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, that will check the monopolistic fears that people have with centralized mining. And I think I'm empirically correct in this to where people were afraid of Bitmain, hijacking or controlling all of Bitcoin. But empirically, you allowed the market to work, and Bitmain's power was obsoleted by a better, competitor and Nchain and CoinGate. So
Mm-hmm.
my thing is that my arguments are empirically validated to where the kind of alarmist, protectionist arguments of BTC, or it's mostly kind of fear mongering over hypothetical situations that don't map to
Well, you're
reality.
still in a slightly speculative space because if like right now, did you hear the story of like that guy trying to synchronize to a new node to Ethereum and it just wasn't possible. The blockchain was far too large and he kept running into fatal errors along the way and like after 3 months of attempting to synchronize a node completely failed and gave up.
Well, sure. Well, maybe he needs to provide a service that provides him enough money in order to invest in a
Yeah,
node that
so
can.
well, the only thing that I'm trying to bring up here is that what you're talking about is a speculative move, right? If and we're both going to agree, cell phones are getting better, faster, stronger, and um, not necessarily cheaper, maybe constant, somewhat constant over time, uh, maybe even more expensive in some cases. But I do see what you're saying, but it's not available today, right? The ability to have big blocks and the ability for those blocks to continue to stack on top of the blockchain, and then ultimately for one to be able to synchronize to that blockchain is going to become increasingly difficult right now today. If we're eliminating speculation, we're talking about today, it's just not possible, right?
Yeah.
But if we bring speculation back into the map, yeah, there is a world, I'm sure, where your reality it plays out perfectly, and maybe in that reality, Bitcoin changes, right? It's a software and people vote on it, right? I am not a professor of Bitcoin here, but I do believe that you're definitely in a more speculative space than BTC with the Lightning Network is, and I mean I remain a maximalist. Just I do agree with you in the sense that innovation shouldn't be stifled. Innovation in this space should be encouraged. And right now, man, it is looked down upon. Right? I'm not a multi-coiner either, but I definitely believe in innovation. I just don't believe that people should be selling their ideas for hundreds of millions of dollars and while at the cost of investors, right? And deceiving investors in particular. So I do see the world that the SV chain speculation that you're discussing. It is absolutely a possibility. And what's to say that, in that reality, if there is an overwhelming agreement that this is a, legitimate proposal that should be introduced and implemented, that BTC doesn't do the same thing, and therefore it rules, SV obsolete, which is spearheaded by a fraud and ultimately a regulatory friendly body. And that's something that you said. Let's hit the first topic, and then I want to hit the regulatory thing, because you said your worldview has grown to the point to accept the reality of regulatory intervention. I really am curious about that, as well as the what I just said before that.
So nation states compete again,
I'm
and
sorry. What competes?
nation states compete with each other,
Nation states. Yeah.
one another to attract businesses in order to generate wealth and tax revenue for their country. So then their regulatory regimes compete with one another. If one nation state gets too tyrannical and starts seizing companies or putting CEOs in jail,
Uh-huh.
then they're not going to be a very attractive business destination,
Uh-huh.
right? So I guess what I'm trying to say is that you got to look at the big picture. Everybody kind of looks at their situation within the country that they live within, and they feel that the state is this all powerful deity that they got to protect themselves against. But I look at the big picture and I see that there is no nation state that has a monopoly in the world, and that
Uh-huh.
these nation states compete, and that competition checks their power. And that that worldview aligns or informs my view of kind of Bitcoin politics or Bitcoin governance, is that it's not decentralization that keeps Bitcoin, secure or safe. It's
Uh-huh.
competition. The threat of another miner entering the market, if this miner starts acting in an irrational way, to check that miner's power. So I think at a fundamental level, it's open competition that keeps the system honest and keeps people acting in an honest way. It's not decentralization.
Now, is there anything that are you? I heard you once say you're a Kevin Pham maximalist, right? Now, I'm assuming I'm not taking that as like the most selfish act in the world here. What I'm saying is, are you moving? Are you seamlessly capable of moving in and out of camps? Because like I said, you and I were shoulder to shoulder smashing Litecoiners, smashing all kinds of altcoins.
Mhm.
Now, are you going to, in the event that you find you're wrong, like what's your next move going to be? Are you going to be like, yo, Bitcoin BTC is back, or are you going to like say something goes wrong in SV? What's your take there? Is BTC done in your mind? Are you done for life, or are the things that have
So then to the Kevin Pham maximalist thing, I think that's very consistent with Bitcoin culture being individualist
Mhm,
and being a quote unquote sovereign individual, to where I think for myself and I'm able to sustain myself, to
mhm.
that I don't need to be part of a collective in order to protect myself and to remain um, relevant. So again, I think it's very easy to advocate for kind of a free market, competitive system in theory, and also to advocate for being contrarian, to be bold, and to be individualistic in theory. But what I'm discovering is that in reality, being part of a collective, being part of a large group and identifying with a group
Uh-huh.
is actually what most people do. What most people do.
Is that good or
So,
bad to you?
well, it's good for me. not good for people that don't realize it.
Mm-hmm.
So, the fact that I'm getting a lot of flack for kind of going against the consensus is kind of empirical evidence that being a contrarian or being an individualist is actually a lot harder than it seems in theory, because you have a lot of people that have a competing incentive that will try to make your life not very fun.
Well, let me put it like this. I think the community is, if anything, not necessarily just upset at the contrariest point of view, right? Obviously, that's like kind of what you have been known for, right? Is being contrarian against altcoins, like we discussed. But I would say the anger directed toward you most likely has a lot more to do with the sense of betrayal. You were kind of like a flag bearer in the, especially on crypto Twitter, a BTC maximalist flag bearer. You were, you rallied the troops quite often. And so you're like, imagine in a way this general that is inciting all this hope, and maybe whether it be irrational or what, it was hope nonetheless. And I think that move that you made was, I think people are upset at that because it's more of like more of a betrayal feeling than it is a, we don't like change. It's more of that, I would say, as an element than what you think. I'm not condoning anything. I don't believe that people should be violent in this space. I do believe it is a competitive space, and again, that's consistent with our free market agreement. But I would say, me personally, when I saw you start tweeting SB stuff, I was like, whoa, this guy's backing the brainchild project of a known fraud, right? Who claims to be Satoshi Nakamoto, yet refuses to produce, empirical evidence, like you say. And that's a really big inconsistency, right? You're this, really smart, strong driven individual who's defending the project of, and I understand that you want to focus on the technical components, but this is also a space filled with, you know, many wolves dressed in sheep's clothing, and that's what a lot of people see you supporting, and that's inconsistent with who a lot of people know you or got to know you as, and I would say I think that's what I attribute to what people have done and said or whatever to make you wear a bulletproof vest.
Yeah. So I would say that the people that think I'm betraying them are being hypocrites, because it's a very collectivist view that I am beholden to a group. Me as an
Uh-huh.
individual is beholden to a group, that they are entitled to my support or my service. That's a
Hmm.
very collectivist. That's a very collectivist view. Um, when in reality, Bitcoin works because everybody pursues their own self-interest. That's the reason why it works. You're not supposed to trust other
Well,
people.
so
You're
so let's
supposed
hit
to
that real quick.
you're
I
supposed to
asked myself
pursue
this
your own
question.
self-interest, and that's supposed to create a check and balance to keep the system stable and secure.
Like, let me ask you this though: Are you in Bitcoin because you hate sovereign control over, like our existing structure, financial structure with, the Federal Reserve and various other entities? Are you in Bitcoin out of your hate for them or out of your love for the success of the, 99%? Which like, which category do you feel you fit in most?
Well, I believe free markets serve the masses the best,
Uh-huh.
and I see Bitcoin providing a competition to the central banking oligopoly that is
Uh-huh.
not serving the 99% best. So
So,
I'm a supporter of freedom, innovation, and competition,
mhm.
and I see Bitcoin as the flag bearer for that.
Bitcoin
And
SB, you say?
well, Bitcoin, the idea,
Okay.
and that's why I support it, because it gives competition to the oligopoly that I don't feel is serving its customers
Of
very well.
course. I mean, I think many people would agree it's not doing the greatest good for the greatest number of people. And so, I think I got, a good answer. I'm hearing that you're in it, you know, you're familiar, you had this close personal relationship with the space, right? And you were exposed to its, disgusting practices, and it affected you, right? And so you joined Bitcoin, and you're saying, despite the negative emotion you feel for those entities, you're also in Bitcoin for, the love of us, the everyday person, right? You're the greatest good for the greatest number of people, the make a system work best for everyone, as many people as it can. So, I'm hearing that, you still like I want everyone to know, like you still have a heart, you're not just this, like, backstabber or whatever. I definitely think that we're going to disagree, and I would like to, maybe even revisit this concept of maximalism in the future to see if your views have changed or not, because I'm very curious to see what happens. SV is I do agree there were specific attacks on it to keep it from being listed on exchanges and getting, BCH, ABC, taking the ticker symbol in a number of exchanges out the gate, right? Like that was straight up deceit, right? It was a chain. The exchanges should have supported both chains, right? Including even Coinbase and stuff, right? So yeah, there is some stuff going on there, but I do wonder, I don't think Craig Wright, as a flag bearer for this tech, and a lead developer, and among others, I don't know if his goal is greatest good for greatest number of people, and regulatory, seeking regulatory friends, and friendships, this approach to a coexisting regulatory slash, decentralized protocol. It's just the two don't fit. That's like the Gemini brothers, the Winklevoss twins, saying revolutions need rules. Well, like the truth is, the most important rule of a revolution is don't become the enemy you seek to overthrow. So it's like I feel like there's within some of these camps where people have power. There's a lot of inconsistencies that I believe are going to grow into worse problems, like we saw it happen in Bcash itself before it forked in November. That was a war between Roger Jihan versus Craig and Calvin, and I can't imagine that there's going to be a move in the future that gets mass adoption for BSV that doesn't happen for that in that reality where BSV wins and BTC doesn't. I can't. I understand your point that innovation is important, but I just don't see BSV doing anything and making any particular moves that make Bitcoin's application as a currency and the ability for everyone to participate in its network, two sides of the same coin. You know what I mean? Like, in order to do both, I don't feel like SV is pursuing that roadmap.
Well, you're entitled to your opinion.
Yeah, so we're gonna agree to disagree, is what you're saying.
Sure.
Okay, yeah, and it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Again, you're someone that a lot of people looked up to, and maybe some people still do. I assume that you're met in the BSB community with skepticism. I mean, I can't imagine what it's like to be you right now. You're kind of like you have your foot in a couple different areas, and like you're wearing a bulletproof vest, man. Like, you know, I guess that we barely touched that. Are you okay?
Well, it's not easy, but then anything worth having or striving for isn't easy.
Yeah.
If
Well,
it was easy, then everybody would have it,
I
right?
suppose. Well, I mean, there are certain liberties everyone should have, and they should be easy to have, and we don't, So I think that, wearing a bulletproof vest because you switch camps is a little bit weird, but maybe a reality that that you're faced with. I don't know, uh, any particular details of that, but is
Well,
there?
I mean, I know BTC culture very well, and they're very ideological,
Mhm.
and they're very quick to create a good and evil narrative,
Well,
and
as far
also
as ideology is concerned, I mean
and
that has a very.
they're also very kind of pro, Second Amendment,
Uh-huh.
pro, freedom to bear arms.
Well, aren't you as
So
well?
was that?
Aren't you as well?
Yeah, yeah. So then, um, I'm pretty confident that if BTC ever gets close to being flipped or threatened, its top spot, that people with not a lot to lose will do
Mm,
stupid things. Um, yeah, but also, I just think it looks cool and it keeps me warm. So it's like, if
yeah.
I'm gonna wear a jacket, might as well, yeah, wear something that protects me because if I'm going to be logically consistent of being a sovereign individual, then I need to take responsibility for my own safety.
So this is both a statement and something like a literal fashion type of not just fashion, but a personal philosophical statement, as well as a and I agree with that. Like on that topic, what's your view on like people calling for SEC intervention on XRP being a security and all these various other Ethereum being a security? You're saying I'm wearing a bulletproof vest because I believe I'm a sovereign individual and I am in charge of my own life, essentially,
Mm-hmm.
right? Now, do you have a position on SEC intervention or whatever on these various altcoins? Like, do you think people crying out for SEC help are hypocrites? Do you think people crying out for SEC intervention are justified because no one should be losing their money to liars? Or what's your position on that?
Well, two things. I don't think all regulations are evil. There are
Hmm.
some regulations that are put in place for a reason, and then also there are kind of corrupt regulations that are put in to protect incumbents. Um,
Uh-huh.
and second, I would rather people compete with the existing legal paradigm than lobbying legislators in order to change the rules to suit their mistakes.
Do you
And
think
so if Bitcoin can launch itself in a way that reduces its regulatory and legal attack surface by launching itself without a pre-mine and just being a digital commodity, and Ethereum is unable to do that, unable to just release the software and to allow people to start mining as opposed to, selling a token in order to, pay a team in order to, uh, create the protocol. I don't think that Bitcoin should be penalized because of that, and that there should be a special carve out for Ethereum because they were the ones that were willing to pay the money to pay the lobbyists to change the regulators to get the regulators to turn a blind eye or to
mhm.
create a special exemption for them. To me, that's crony capitalist behavior. That's kind of like no different than the banks lobbying the government to bail themselves out um, when they engaged in fraud.
And just so
Um,
everyone that's listening or watches this later knows, Ethereum was basically they agreed that it was a security, right? But basically said it's too big to fail. And is that a long story short that you can agree with?
well, the SEC came out with this weird explanation that Ethereum started out as a security and then turned into a commodity
Ah,
now that it's decentralized. When in reality, the roadmap seems um, very centralized with what Vitalik wanted,
hmm.
and right now it's still very centralized in the hands of a few developers. So I don't think it passes the sniff test. So I mean that was the reason why I kind of raised made a big scene about that
Uh-huh.
because I basically saw Ethereum engaging in crony capitalist behavior in order to protect itself from the regulatory attacks their oversights brought on, to where in the BSV camp they're very, very knowledgeable and careful in interpreting the legal landscape as it currently is, and to make decisions that will not get the regulatory authorities, legal authorities to attack them. Therefore, they don't need to lobby to change laws. They exist. The way that I say it is, they play the ball as it lies, right? As opposed to trying to change the rules. And this kind of goes into my hypothesis with competitive governance. I think a lot of entities compete on their ability to govern and set rules fairly or optimally. So, for example, sports leagues, they engage in competitive governance, right? So the sports leagues that design the rules in a certain way and also make sure that the referees that are enforcing the certain rules optimize for competitive behavior, which creates a better product, right? So if a sports league incentivizes competition, that creates a better product. Whereas if a sports league allows different teams to dictate the rules to benefit themselves, then that creates a non-competitive, non-health, not an environment that's not healthy for competition, and then reduces the competitive product. So the entities that are able to enforce their rules in an impartial, objective way are the entities that maximize the competitiveness of their product. And that free market mechanism is what increases the product of governance. So any nation state that changes its rules to benefit one particular player will be hindering the competitive health of the entire ecosystem. So then once one cryptocurrency gets big enough to capture the government, then that will reduce the overall competition of the space. So if Ethereum gets to have a benefit for breaking the law, whereas Bitcoin is penalized for breaking the law, then that is not a long-term conducive effect on the entire cryptocurrency ecosystem.
Yeah, again, I have the rip the Band-Aid off mentality here. I do believe that I don't think there really should be any kind of leeway. I think this, I'm not calling for SEC intervention. Again, I do believe in free market action, but I also I think if it's going to happen, if the SEC is going to swing the hammer, I think it should be hard. You know what I mean? I think if they are going to enter the space, I think there have been a lot of people that have been exploiting, the people you and I agree need, a new system, right? A new financial system that protects them from exploitation, right? So if there is this, gigantic move, in a regulatory perspective, I would say I'm all for ripping the Band-Aid off. I do think that, maybe I'm a little chaotic in that sense. I do believe it'll have a lot of negative ramifications for many investors. I've seen people go all in on Verge. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And BSV, and you can say Craig is, one person that is willing to actually take action and to get lawmakers to enforce the rules as they are. So
well, he took
another
one
reason
move.
why I'm kind of in the BSV camp, is that they're very mature and very serious about how they go about their business, and they don't just let things slide. So yeah, so maybe that will kind of open your eyes to, BSV, to where they're willing to enforce the rules as to encourage lawmakers to enforce the rules as they are to protect their position of being kind of responsible and thoughtful about how they go about things.
How is that going to change my position? I would say,
Well, so then I'm saying that they're the only camp that's willing to fight for this.
so
To
you're fight
to
fight
fight
for the prevention of the exploitation of
no,
individuals, is what
to
you're saying.
fight for the fair and objective application of the law.
Well, I mean, in a way, I agree. In another way, I would say if Craig Wright is trying to patent every single blockchain application, in its infancy before anyone else can, and essentially become a millionaire, billionaire if he isn't already, allegedly, I think it's an interesting move. I think it's a little weird. You don't think it's weird that he's trying, an alleged Satoshi Nakamoto is trying to own blockchain essentially, like, blockchain patents.
Well, if he's the creator, he has its right. And also, who would you rather have the patent? A Bitcoin implementation or JP Morgan?
Well, if if an implementation is made to Bitcoin, who would suffer, right? Is anyone going to
So
if miners
who would you rather have the patent? A Bitcoin implementation or JP Morgan Chase?
well, what you're asking is who would rather have the patent, Craig or JP Morgan? That's
No,
a
I said
really
a Bitcoin implementation or JP Morgan Chase.
Yeah, but it's not just a Bitcoin implementation. It's a little loaded what you're saying. It's Craig's implementation, right? And that's a very difficult question to answer because who would I rather have with the blockchain, patent? A
Well,
person
so
that
the thing is, as you see, somebody's going to have the patent, right?
well, that there's that concept of if it could be sued, it's centralized, right? And if you even if you say take a blockchain patent and apply it to Bitcoin and miners agree on it, who do you go after, right? Like say it was an illegally obtained blockchain patent that's been implemented because it was the best and it was agreed upon and voted and implemented. Well, who's gonna be hit by whatever regulatory body at that point? Like Bitcoin is like hardcore rebel, like who gives a fudge who has the patent? If there is a better technology and it's in writing, it can be implemented to Bitcoin and no regulatory body is going to be able to do anything about it, right? What are they going to do in that theoretical scenario?
Yeah. So you're not answering the question. Somebody is going to own the patent in this reality that we live in.
Uh-huh. So you're saying answer the hard question, Joe. I would say, man, that's a tough question. That's a tough question, Kevin. I need to think about that one. I don't trust J.P. Morgan Chase. I definitely don't want a blockchain, patent that is going to revolutionize, a global ownership of currency in the hands of an existing entity that actively ties identity to transactions, preventing you from being a sovereign individual, right? No, I don't want J.P. Morgan to have that. Do I want Craig Wright to have that? Through whatever, let's say he's lying. Do I want a liar to have that? Who's doing everything he can to maybe pretend he's Satoshi Nakamoto to obtain these blockchain patents and ultimately become the
Well,
billionaire he claims to
what
be?
he's doing, he's not doing anything illegal.
But if he's lying, he's doing something definitely immoral. And if he's drawing a following out of that lie, then that's definitely immoral. And that's, in terms of legality in this space, I mean, we would say slavery is legal, right? So I'm not always going to play that the legal card is the most valuable card. I'm going to play that the moral card is the most valuable card. And who will morally handle blockchain patents better, JP Morgan or Craig Wright? That's a really good question. And I don't have a good answer right off the top of my head. Like, if
So,
you're putting a gun to my head and saying pick one, I would say, I hate to admit this. If you put a gun to my head and said, Joe, fucking choose, Joe,
mhm,
excuse my language, choose,
mhm.
um, I would say I would not want it in the hands of JP Morgan Chase. They are 10 times worse than I believe Craig Wright is right now.
I agree, and they're kind of the incumbent. And to me, going with my whole competition thesis, like I wouldn't like that either. So then I gotta go soon, but I guess just long story short, um, basically what I'm trying to say is that Bitcoin needs to grow up, and if we want things to happen, then you need to question your assumptions and to ask yourself why things are the way they are in the real world empirically, and that you should be skeptical of your kind of ideological utopian desires and to try to understand why the world works the way that it works empirically. And then once you do that, you can be more effective in the real world
Well, see,
as
that's your
opposed.
worldview, though. You know, that's definitely your view, and I don't think I'm completely connected to your worldview. I think you and I are going to be able to have a nice discussion on that, and maybe put myself in your shoes and let me see the world from your eyes, and maybe I'll be able to agree certain points. But I still think that's, you know, a very perspective-based mentality, right? I
Yeah.
think it's
So,
false to
so
assume
to
that you know
me, I
everything.
don't see any empirical working implementation of a decentralized society. I see competitive societies working very well. I don't see things where things are arbitrarily decentralized and everybody having a say.
Hmm. So you're in other words for centralization depending on the central authority, and right now the central authority that you believe
No, no,
in
no, no.
is
I'm for radical open competition.
uh-huh.
And,
But radical open competition has essentially created, I mean, do you honestly think miners
and I'm aware that radical open competition creates economies of scale
uh-huh.
and consolidation in markets in the short term.
Hmm.
But
Okay,
in
so
the long
you're expecting
term,
on a long term that the existing infrastructure as far as hash distribution within SB is going to, you know, assuming that it grows and expands and all this stuff, it'll become much more Bitcoin like, BTC like, where there's, you know, larger numbers of, you know, different
no,
competitors.
no. So what I'm going to see is theoretically in a open competition, a lot of turnover in who is dominating the space, as opposed to having a lot of different allocations of different miners in the space. So the way that I see it is that I look at things like the UFC, which
Okay.
basically kind of broke down barriers between fighting styles, and it's a very open, competitive market. And what I see in the UFC is that whoever's on the top never stays there for very long.
Okay.
It's constantly somebody is coming up with a new innovation, exploiting a new weakness that people didn't see,
Oh, age.
and whoever was that,
Age.
sure, or complacency or whatever.
Mhm.
Um, and that open competitive market constantly creates churn at the top to where anybody with the right ability or with the right drive can become a champion and be at the top of the hierarchy. um, so that's kind of what I see, how that's my indication of an open competitive market. Now if you're a champion and then somehow you're able to change the rules to make some moves or something illegal,
Uh-huh.
then that will theoretically decrease the competition in the market and protect your place at the top. And that's kind of what I see, BTC doing, is that they're at the top of the hierarchy, and then they see other people trying to compete for their place in the hierarchy, and they're changing or subverting the original rule set that made Bitcoin great in order to protect their position on top. So yeah, so that's a long story short, is that I believe that radical open competition is what checks tyranny, and not necessarily artificially imposed measures for decentralization.
Understood. All right. Yeah, and I do understand we all have a day about us. Thank you so much for giving, me and Block TV your time. And on an ending note, are you and I ever going to be side by side on Twitter trashing altcoins again, or are your days, over? What's that looking like?
Yeah, well, I mean, BSV hates all altcoins, so again, I'm consistent there. To where, for example, for whatever reason, BTC is very open to Litecoin and Grin. So again,
I
I'm
don't
just trying
think
to be.
BTC is open to Litecoin. I think Grin is complete garbage, probably 100% manipulated. When it first came about, not long ago, January 16th or something. Price was
But I mean, like
definitely.
you look at, like the magical crypto friends or whatever, right? Those guys are technically supposed to be like the main Bitcoin maximalist crew, and they're filled with the leader of Monero, the leader of Litecoin, and yeah,
Hmm.
it's very just think about it. It's very inconsistent, and
Yeah,
we
well,
we can we can do a whole new video about how decreasing the block size pushed off a lot of users and businesses onto other blockchains, and uh, and actually increasing the growth of competitive substitute altcoins. But yeah, we don't have time for that now. Maybe
yeah, yeah,
another
of
time.
course, of course. And again, it's been a pleasure. Maybe you and I can, trash altcoins together again. And maybe the community can say, hey, Kevin's just on a different path for now, and we still have a lot of similarities, and hopefully you won't have to be wearing that bulletproof vest unless you have other troubles going on. But dude, thank you for your time, and it's been a pleasure.
All right, appreciate you having me on, Jeff.
Yeah, take care, Kevin. On a closing note for Block TV, I'd like to thank everyone who watches this video, even parts of it. I'd like to thank everyone, Kevin, for participating, and please tune into blocktv.com for all kinds of crypto information. As a very neutral media organization, we pursue every avenue. Tomorrow, we'll be interviewing a specialist in XRP tech, as an objective view. Despite everyone knowing me as a Bitcoin maximalist, I will be, uh, you know, neutrally, objectively, factually based, looking at the XRP, protocol, whatever ledger, and we'll be looking at it with a technical professional. And I look forward to, hopefully, I hope there's a Bitcoin maximalist dev out there that wants to step up and sit with me and do the same. I'm looking forward to all kinds of discussions here, and this is a forum where we're going to invite all kinds of communication, particularly with the audience. And I look forward to everyone's feedback. And feel free to contact me on joe@blocktv.com. Feel free to contact me on Twitter at joe_saz. And, subscribe and follow Block TV at Block TV News on Twitter as well. All right, take care, everyone, and I hope you enjoyed this. I'll be doing as much good content for you as for you all as I can. Thank you very much.